Question 1. The efficiency study reveals that a significant number of new license holders in Ontario are completing the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, in a shorter-than-average time frame. An instructor, aiming to improve their course's efficiency rating, is considering streamlining the practical demonstration of safe firearm handling and storage procedures, believing that most participants grasp these concepts quickly. Which of the following actions best upholds the regulatory and ethical requirements for delivering the CRFSC in Ontario? Option A. Providing a condensed verbal overview of storage and transportation laws in Ontario, rather than detailed practical demonstrations, to save time during the course. Option B. Reducing the time spent on practical demonstrations of safe firearm handling and storage, focusing only on the most critical steps to meet the efficiency study's implied goal of faster course completion. Option C. Ensuring all practical demonstrations of safe firearm handling, storage, and transportation are conducted thoroughly and in accordance with the CRFSC curriculum, regardless of the time taken, and verifying student comprehension through practical assessment. Option D. Allowing participants who express confidence in their firearm handling abilities to skip certain practical demonstrations, as long as they pass the written examination. The correct answer is C. Ensuring all practical demonstrations of safe firearm handling, storage, and transportation are conducted thoroughly and in accordance with the CRFSC curriculum, regardless of the time taken, and verifying student comprehension through practical assessment. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential gap in the practical application of safe firearm handling procedures among new license holders in Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient training with the absolute priority of public safety and adherence to the Firearms Act Canada and its associated regulations, specifically the Criminal Code of Canada concerning the safe storage, transportation, and use of firearms. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise public trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the training materials and instructor delivery methods to ensure they align precisely with the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC curriculum, and the legal requirements for restricted firearms in Ontario. This includes verifying that all aspects of safe handling, storage, and transportation are covered in a manner that is both understandable and practically demonstrable to new license holders. The regulatory justification stems from the Firearms Act Canada and the Criminal Code of Canada, which mandate specific safety standards for firearm ownership and operation. The CRFSC itself is designed to impart this knowledge and these skills, and any deviation that compromises this objective is unacceptable. Ethically, instructors have a duty of care to their students and the public to ensure that all license holders are adequately prepared to handle firearms safely and legally. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of completion over comprehensive understanding. For instance, rushing through the practical components of the course, such as demonstrating safe firearm handling techniques or explaining storage requirements, to shorten the session time would be a significant regulatory failure. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the CRFSC, which is designed to instill a deep understanding of safety protocols, not just a superficial familiarity. Such an approach also fails to meet the ethical obligation to adequately train individuals who will be responsible for potentially dangerous items. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that prior knowledge or perceived competence of a student negates the need for thorough instruction on all mandated CRFSC topics. While some individuals may have prior experience, the course is designed to standardize knowledge and ensure all license holders meet a minimum safety standard as defined by Canadian law. Failing to cover all required modules, even for seemingly experienced individuals, is a regulatory oversight and an ethical lapse, as it could lead to complacency and the overlooking of crucial safety nuances specific to restricted firearms in Ontario. A further incorrect approach would be to simplify or omit explanations of the legal requirements for firearm storage and transportation in Ontario, such as specific locking mechanisms or transport procedures. This is a direct contravention of the Criminal Code of Canada and the Firearms Act, which outlines strict penalties for improper storage and transportation. Ethically, it is irresponsible to allow individuals to obtain a license without a clear understanding of their legal obligations, which are paramount to preventing accidents and misuse. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to upholding the highest standards of safety and regulatory compliance. This means prioritizing the integrity of the training program over any perceived efficiency gains. Professionals should regularly review their training methodologies against the official CRFSC curriculum and relevant Canadian legislation. When faced with scenarios that might tempt a compromise, they must ask, does this approach fully equip the individual with the knowledge and skills required by law and ethical practice to handle firearms safely and responsibly in Ontario? If the answer is anything less than a resounding yes, the approach must be revised. Question 2. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of regulatory frameworks. In Ontario, an individual who has successfully completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, and is knowledgeable about restricted firearms is approached by friends who are interested in learning how to handle them. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for this individual? Option A. Strictly adhere to the official CRFSC curriculum and only provide instruction in a formal, certified capacity, directing friends to enroll in an approved course. Option B. Provide informal lessons on handling restricted firearms to friends, sharing personal knowledge and techniques to ensure they handle them safely. Option C. Share personal experiences and tips about restricted firearms that go beyond the scope of the official CRFSC curriculum, aiming to provide them with practical insights. Option D. Offer to show them the ropes with a restricted firearm in a controlled environment, demonstrating basic handling and safety procedures. Correct answer is A. Strictly adhere to the official CRFSC curriculum and only provide instruction in a formal, certified capacity, directing friends to enroll in an approved course. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their personal desire to share knowledge with the strict legal obligations and safety protocols surrounding restricted firearms in Ontario. The challenge lies in understanding the nuances of what constitutes instruction versus casual sharing, and the potential legal ramifications of providing information that could be misconstrued or misused, even with good intentions. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Ontario Firearms Act and the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, curriculum, prioritizing public safety and legal adherence above all else. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the official CRFSC curriculum and only providing instruction in a formal, certified capacity. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal requirements for firearms safety education in Ontario. The Ontario Firearms Act mandates that individuals seeking to possess restricted firearms must demonstrate competency through approved safety courses. The CRFSC is the designated course, and its curriculum is designed to cover all necessary safety aspects, handling procedures, and legal responsibilities. By limiting instruction to the official curriculum in formal settings, an individual ensures they are acting within the bounds of the law, preventing the unauthorized dissemination of potentially incomplete or misleading information that could compromise safety or lead to legal penalties. This approach prioritizes the integrity of the safety training and the responsible ownership of firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis, providing informal lessons on handling restricted firearms to friends, even if the intent is to share knowledge and ensure they handle them safely, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal requirements for firearms safety training in Ontario. It bypasses the structured curriculum of the CRFSC, which is legally mandated for demonstrating competency. Such informal instruction could inadvertently omit critical safety information or legal details, increasing the risk of accidents or misuse. Furthermore, it could be interpreted as providing instruction without proper certification, potentially violating regulations. Offering to show them the ropes with a restricted firearm without formal certification or adherence to the CRFSC curriculum is also professionally unacceptable. This approach directly contravenes the legal framework for restricted firearms in Ontario. The act of demonstrating handling, even in a seemingly controlled environment, constitutes a form of instruction. Without being a certified instructor and following the prescribed course content, this action is illegal and unsafe. It bypasses the rigorous safety checks and standardized training that are legally required to ensure responsible ownership and handling. Sharing personal experiences and tips about restricted firearms that go beyond the scope of the official CRFSC curriculum, even with the intention of being helpful, is professionally unacceptable. While personal experience can be valuable, it is not a substitute for legally mandated training. The CRFSC curriculum is specifically designed to cover all essential safety aspects and legal requirements. Deviating from this curriculum, even with good intentions, risks providing incomplete or inaccurate information, which could have serious safety and legal consequences. It also undermines the standardized approach to firearm safety education that is crucial for public safety in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves understanding the specific regulations governing firearms in their jurisdiction, in this case, Ontario. When faced with a situation where knowledge sharing is desired, the professional should first consult the relevant legislation and the official curriculum of any mandated safety courses. The decision-making framework should involve asking, does this action comply with the Ontario Firearms Act and the CRFSC requirements? And does this action uphold the highest standards of public safety? If the answer to either question is no, the action should be avoided. Instead, the professional should direct individuals to seek instruction through certified channels and offer their support within the legal and ethical boundaries of their role, such as encouraging participation in the official CRFSC. Question 3. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in recreational shooting participation in Ontario. A licensed owner of a restricted firearm wishes to allow a friend, who is also a licensed shooter but does not own a restricted firearm, to handle their restricted firearm at a local shooting range. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the owner to take in Ontario? Option A. Allow the friend to handle the restricted firearm at the shooting range, as they are a licensed shooter, and the handling will occur under supervision at a controlled environment. Option B. Ensure the friend possesses a valid possession and acquisition license (PAL) with authorization for restricted firearms, and complete the official firearm transfer process with the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program before the friend handles the firearm at the range. Option C. Lend the restricted firearm to the friend for the day, assuming they will return it after their shooting session at the range. Option D. Store the restricted firearm at the shooting range for the friend to pick up and use, as they have expressed interest in trying it. The correct answer is B. Ensure the friend possesses a valid possession and acquisition license (PAL) with authorization for restricted firearms, and complete the official firearm transfer process with the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program before the friend handles the firearm at the range. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the individual to balance the immediate desire to share a firearm with the stringent legal requirements for its transfer and storage in Ontario, Canada. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including fines and imprisonment, and compromise public safety. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal obligations are met before any transfer or use of the firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring all legal requirements for the transfer of a restricted firearm are met before any physical possession is transferred. This includes verifying that the recipient possesses a valid possession and acquisition license (PAL) with the appropriate authorization for restricted firearms, and that the transfer is registered with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police (RCMP) Canadian Firearms Program. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to Section 25 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which governs the transfer of firearms, and the Firearms Act, which mandates registration and licensing. Ethically, it prioritizes public safety by ensuring firearms are only in the hands of legally authorized individuals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing a friend to handle the restricted firearm at the range without completing the official transfer process. This is a regulatory failure as it constitutes an unauthorized possession and transfer of a restricted firearm, violating Section 25 of the Criminal Code. It bypasses the mandatory registration and licensing checks, creating a significant public safety risk. Another incorrect approach is to simply hand the restricted firearm over to the friend, assuming their experience is sufficient. This ignores the legal requirement for the recipient to have a valid PAL and for the transfer to be officially recorded. It is a direct contravention of the Firearms Act in the Criminal Code, and ethically irresponsible as it places a firearm in potentially unauthorized hands. A further incorrect approach is to store the restricted firearm at the range for the friend to pick up later, without completing the transfer. This still constitutes an illegal transfer and possession. The firearm remains registered to the original owner, and the friend would be in illegal possession of a restricted firearm without the proper authorization and without the transfer being officially processed. This creates a liability for the owner and a legal risk for the friend. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize adherence to the Criminal Code of Canada and the Firearms Act when dealing with firearms. The decision-making process should involve a clear understanding of the legal requirements for possession, acquisition, and transfer of firearms. Before any action is taken that involves a firearm, especially a restricted one, one must confirm: 1. Is the individual legally permitted to possess this type of firearm? 2. Has the transfer been legally processed and registered? 3. Is the firearm stored in compliance with regulations? If any of these questions cannot be answered affirmatively and with documented proof, the action should not proceed. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates that during a Canadian Restricted Firearm Safety Course (CRFSC) session in Ontario, a participant demonstrates a significant safety lapse by improperly handling a restricted firearm during a dry fire exercise, specifically by failing to maintain muzzle discipline. As the certified instructor, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Immediately halt the training session. Clearly explain to the participant why their actions were unsafe and unacceptable, and then proceed to document the incident thoroughly and report it according to CRFSC and Ontario provincial guidelines. Option B. Immediately confiscate the firearm and dismiss the participant from the course without any formal documentation or reporting. Option C. Ignore the safety lapse, assuming it was a minor mistake and not worth disrupting the training for, and continue the session as planned. Option D. Verbally warn the participant about their unsafe action and continue with the training, assuming they have understood the correction. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt the training session. Clearly explain to the participant why their actions were unsafe and unacceptable, and then proceed to document the incident thoroughly and report it according to CRFSC and Ontario provincial guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearms instructor to balance the immediate need to address a safety concern with the legal and ethical obligations to document and report incidents accurately. Misjudging the severity of the situation or failing to follow proper reporting procedures could have serious consequences, including potential legal repercussions and a compromise of public safety. The instructor must act decisively, yet adhere strictly to the established protocols of the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and calmly stopping the training session, clearly explaining the reason for the interruption to the participant, and then proceeding with the required documentation and reporting as mandated by the CRFSC curriculum and Ontario provincial regulations for firearms safety training. This approach prioritizes safety by halting potentially dangerous activity and ensures compliance with legal and procedural requirements. The CRFSC curriculum emphasizes a structured approach to incident management, which includes immediate intervention and thorough reporting to relevant authorities and the course administrator. This aligns with the legal framework in Ontario that governs firearms safety training and the responsible handling of firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the participant's actions as a minor oversight without any formal documentation or reporting. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risks associated with firearms and neglects the legal obligation to report safety infractions, potentially creating a precedent for lax safety standards and failing to address the root cause of the participant's error. This directly contravenes the safety-first principle of the CRFSC and the reporting requirements under Ontario's firearms legislation. Another incorrect approach is to immediately confiscate the firearm and terminate the participant's course without a clear, documented reason or following the established incident reporting protocol. While intervention is necessary, an undocumented and overly punitive response can lead to disputes and may not be in line with the progressive disciplinary steps often outlined in training programs. It bypasses the required documentation and reporting, which are crucial for accountability and for informing future training or regulatory actions. A further incorrect approach is to proceed with the training after a verbal warning, assuming the participant has understood the correction, without any written record. This creates a gap in the training record and leaves no official trace of the safety infraction. If a similar incident were to occur later, or if the participant were to have a subsequent issue, the lack of prior documentation would hinder a comprehensive assessment of their progress and adherence to safety protocols, which is a critical failure in maintaining a robust safety record, as required by the CRFSC and Ontario's regulatory environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms safety instruction must adopt a systematic approach to incident management. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the safety risk and taking decisive action to mitigate it. 2. Adhering strictly to established protocols for documentation and reporting, understanding that these are legal requirements and essential for maintaining training integrity. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally with the participant, explaining the rationale behind any interventions or corrective actions. 4. Recognizing that every incident, regardless of perceived severity, must be recorded to ensure accountability and to contribute to the overall safety record of the training program and the responsible ownership of firearms in Ontario. Question 5. Regulatory review indicates that a licensed individual in Ontario is storing a restricted firearm at their residence. They propose to store the firearm unloaded, secured with a trigger lock, within a locked gun case. This gun case will then be placed inside a locked bedroom. The ammunition will be stored in the same gun case, but in a separate zippered compartment. Considering the legal requirements for firearm storage in Ontario, which of the following storage arrangements represents the most compliant and professionally responsible approach? Option A. The restricted firearm is stored unloaded and locked with a trigger lock in a closet, with the ammunition placed in a separate unlocked box on a shelf. Option B. The restricted firearm is stored unloaded and in a locked gun case that is then placed in a locked bedroom, with the ammunition stored in the same gun case but in a separate zippered compartment. Option C. The restricted firearm is stored unloaded in a locked cabinet that is not secured to the building structure, with the ammunition stored in a separate locked drawer within the same cabinet. Option D. The restricted firearm is stored unloaded in a locked, non-restricted firearm safe that is securely fastened to the building structure, and the ammunition is stored separately in a locked container. The correct answer is D. The restricted firearm is stored unloaded in a locked, non-restricted firearm safe that is securely fastened to the building structure, and the ammunition is stored separately in a locked container. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the responsible storage of restricted firearms, directly impacting public safety and legal compliance in Ontario. The core difficulty lies in balancing the owner's access needs with the stringent requirements for preventing unauthorized access, especially in a shared living environment. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal obligations under Ontario's firearms legislation are met while also considering the practicalities of everyday life. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring that the restricted firearm is stored in a locked, non-restricted firearm safe that is securely fastened to the building structure, and that the ammunition is stored separately in a locked container. This approach directly adheres to the requirements outlined in the Criminal Code of Canada, specifically sections pertaining to the safe storage of firearms, which are enforced in Ontario. The Criminal Code mandates that restricted firearms must be stored unloaded, with the action open or removed, and secured by a trigger lock, cable lock, or a locked container. Furthermore, ammunition must be stored separately from the firearm and also secured in a locked container. This method provides the highest level of security against unauthorized access and accidental discharge, fulfilling the legal and ethical obligations of a firearm owner. Correct approaches analysis. Storing the restricted firearm unloaded in a locked cabinet that is not secured to the building structure, with the ammunition stored in a separate locked drawer within the same cabinet, presents a significant regulatory failure. While the firearm is unloaded and the cabinet is locked, the lack of structural fastening makes the cabinet itself vulnerable to being moved or breached more easily, potentially compromising the security of the firearm. The ammunition being in a locked drawer within the same cabinet, while separate, does not meet the highest standard of security for ammunition storage as mandated by law, which often implies a separate, robustly secured container. Storing the restricted firearm unloaded and locked with a trigger lock in a closet, with the ammunition placed in a separate unlocked box on a shelf, is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. Closet is not considered a secure storage location under the criminal code, and a trigger lock alone is insufficient for a restricted firearm. Furthermore, leaving ammunition in an unlocked box on a shelf poses an extreme risk of unauthorized access and potential misuse, directly contravening the fundamental principles of safe firearm storage. Storing the restricted firearm unloaded and in a locked gun case that is then placed in a locked bedroom, with the ammunition stored in the same gun case but in a separate zippered compartment, is also professionally unacceptable. While a locked gun case offers some protection, it is not inherently a secure storage solution for restricted firearms on its own, especially if it is not secured to a structure. The criminal code's requirements for restricted firearms are more rigorous. Storing ammunition in the same case, even in a separate compartment, does not meet the legal requirement for ammunition to be stored separately and securely in its own locked container. Professional reasoning. Professionals encountering such situations should always prioritize a thorough understanding of the Criminal Code of Canada's provisions regarding firearm storage, as these are the governing laws in Ontario. The decision-making process should involve a systematic assessment of the proposed storage method against each specific legal requirement. Is the firearm unloaded? Is it secured with an appropriate locking device, trigger lock, cable lock, or locked container? Is the container itself secured? Is the ammunition stored separately and in a locked container? When in doubt, always err on the side of maximum security and consult official resources or legal counsel to ensure full compliance. Question 6. Performance analysis shows that during a practical session of the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, in Ontario, a participant, while demonstrating the unloading procedure, inadvertently points the firearm in a direction that violates a fundamental safety rule. The participant then asks a question about the rationale behind that specific safety rule. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for the instructor? Option A. Dismiss the participant's question as unimportant and focus solely on correcting the unsafe handling without further discussion. Option B. Sternly reprimand the participant for their unsafe handling without providing any explanation or answering their question. Option C. Ignore the unsafe handling and proceed to answer the participant's question to avoid disrupting the flow of the lesson. Option D. Immediately stop the participant, clearly explain the safety rule that was violated and why it is critical, and then patiently answer the participant's question about the rule's purpose. Correct answer is D. Immediately stop the participant, clearly explain the safety rule that was violated and why it is critical, and then patiently answer the participant's question about the rule's purpose. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the instructor to balance the immediate need to address a safety concern with the legal and ethical obligations of providing accurate and complete instruction. Failing to address the safety lapse directly could lead to immediate danger, while dismissing the student's question without proper explanation could undermine the learning process and potentially lead to future misunderstandings of critical safety protocols. The instructor must demonstrate sound judgment in prioritizing safety while upholding the integrity of the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, curriculum in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately and clearly addressing the student's unsafe handling of the firearm, explaining the specific safety rule violated, and then patiently answering the student's question about the rule's purpose. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the paramount importance of firearm safety, a core tenet of the CRFSC. By directly intervening, the instructor prevents potential harm and reinforces the immediate application of safety rules. Subsequently, by explaining the rationale behind the rule, the instructor facilitates deeper understanding, ensuring the student not only complies, but comprehends the why behind safe firearm handling, aligning with the educational objectives of the CRFSC in Ontario. This method directly addresses the immediate safety breach, while also fulfilling the instructional mandate. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the student's unsafe handling and proceed with answering the question. This is professionally unacceptable because it neglects the immediate safety risk posed by the student's actions. The CRFSC curriculum in Ontario mandates that instructors actively supervise and correct unsafe practices. Ignoring the unsafe handling demonstrates a failure to uphold this critical responsibility, potentially endangering the student and others. Another incorrect approach is to reprimand the student harshly for the unsafe handling without providing a clear explanation of the rule or answering their question. While addressing unsafe behavior is necessary, a purely punitive response without educational context can be counterproductive. It may create fear or resentment, hindering the student's willingness to learn and ask questions in the future, which is contrary to the supportive learning environment expected in the CRFSC in Ontario. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the student's question as irrelevant and focus solely on the unsafe handling without any explanation. This fails to acknowledge the student's attempt to understand the underlying principles of firearm safety. The CRFSC aims to foster comprehensive knowledge, not just rote memorization of rules. Failing to explain the why behind a safety rule leaves a knowledge gap that could lead to future errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety above all else, followed by clear, concise, and contextually relevant instruction. This involves 1. Immediate identification and correction of any unsafe act. 2. Clear explanation of the specific rule violated and its immediate safety implications. 3. Patiently addressing the student's question, linking it back to the safety rule and its broader purpose within the CRFSC curriculum. 4. Reinforcing the importance of continuous vigilance and adherence to all safety protocols. This systematic approach ensures both immediate safety and long-term comprehension, fulfilling the instructor's duty of care and educational mandate. Question 7. The efficiency study reveals that a licensed individual in Ontario, Canada, needs to transport a newly acquired restricted firearm from a licensed dealer to their approved home storage location. The individual has the firearm unloaded and in its original, unlocked case. They are considering the most efficient way to complete this task while adhering to all legal requirements. Which of the following actions best represents the legally compliant and safest method for transporting this restricted firearm? Option A. Transport the unloaded firearm in its original unlocked case, placed in the locked trunk of the vehicle, and make a brief stop at a convenience store on the way. Option B. Transport the firearm loaded but securely locked within its original case in the trunk of the vehicle to the storage location. Option C. Place the unloaded firearm in its original, unlocked case on the passenger seat of the vehicle and drive directly to the storage location. Option D. Secure the unloaded firearm in a locked container and transport it directly to the approved home storage location without any detours. Correct answer is D. Secure the unloaded firearm in a locked container and transport it directly to the approved home storage location without any detours. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the individual to balance the immediate need to secure a firearm with the legal and ethical obligations surrounding its storage and transportation in Ontario, Canada. Misinterpreting or neglecting the specific requirements of the Ontario Firearms Act and the Criminal Code of Canada regarding transportation can lead to serious legal consequences, including charges related to unsafe storage or transportation of a firearm. The individual must demonstrate a thorough understanding of the legal framework to ensure public safety and compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the firearm in a locked container, separate from ammunition, and transporting it directly to the designated location without any unnecessary stops or deviations. This approach aligns directly with the requirements of the Ontario Firearms Act and the Criminal Code of Canada, which mandate that restricted firearms be transported unloaded in a locked container and directly to a place of use or storage. This minimizes the risk of unauthorized access and ensures compliance with all legal provisions designed to prevent firearm misuse and enhance public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. Transporting the firearm unloaded but in plain view in the vehicle, even if locked in the trunk, fails to meet the requirement of being in a locked container. This creates a significant risk of unauthorized access and is a direct violation of safe transportation regulations. Leaving the firearm unloaded in its original case on the passenger seat while making a brief stop at a convenience store is also unacceptable. This constitutes leaving a firearm unattended and unsecured, which is a serious breach of safe storage and transportation laws, regardless of whether it is unloaded. Transporting the firearm loaded in a locked case, even if the case is secured in the trunk, is a critical violation. The Criminal Code of Canada explicitly prohibits the transportation of loaded firearms, except under very specific, authorized circumstances not present in this scenario. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should always prioritize a thorough understanding of the applicable federal and provincial firearms legislation. When in doubt, it is prudent to err on the side of caution and adhere to the strictest interpretation of the law. A decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the specific type of firearm and its classification, restricted in this case. 2. Recalling the legal requirements for transportation in Ontario, including the need for an unloaded firearm, a locked container, and direct transit. 3. Evaluating the proposed actions against these legal requirements. 4. Choosing the action that most comprehensively meets all legal and safety obligations. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates a customer attempting to purchase a restricted firearm from a licensed dealer in Ontario. The customer presents a valid PAL, but is missing the required registration certificate for the specific firearm they wish to acquire. The dealer is aware of the customer's valid PAL, but is unsure of the exact steps required for the transfer of this particular restricted firearm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the dealer to take? Option A. Provide the customer with general firearm safety information and advise them to research the transfer process independently. Option B. Inform the customer that the transfer cannot proceed without the proper registration certificate and direct them to the appropriate authorities or resources to obtain it, while explaining the legal requirements for restricted firearm transfers. Option C. Complete the transfer using the customer's PAL and inform them that they will need to contact the Canadian Firearms Program to finalize the registration. Option D. Proceed with the sale, assuming the customer will register the firearm later, as they possess a valid PAL. The correct answer is B. Inform the customer that the transfer cannot proceed without the proper registration certificate and direct them to the appropriate authorities or resources to obtain it, while explaining the legal requirements for restricted firearm transfers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding the handling of restricted firearms. The individual must recognize that their access to information does not grant them the authority to bypass established protocols for firearm transfers, especially when dealing with a restricted firearm. The potential consequences of an improper transfer include severe legal penalties, loss of licensing, and significant damage to public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing any attempt to facilitate the transfer and instead directing the individual to the appropriate, legally mandated process. This approach is correct because it upholds the spirit and letter of Canadian firearms legislation, specifically the Criminal Code of Canada and the Firearms Act, which govern the acquisition and possession of restricted firearms. These laws mandate specific procedures, including verification of the possession and acquisition license, PAL, registration of the firearm, and adherence to transfer requirements. By directing the individual to the proper channels, the individual is ensuring compliance, preventing an illegal transfer, and contributing to public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. Facilitating the transfer without the required documentation and verification is a direct violation of the Criminal Code of Canada and the Firearms Act. This constitutes an illegal transfer of a restricted firearm, which carries severe penalties for both the transferor and the transferee. It undermines the entire licensing and registration system designed to control access to restricted firearms and poses a significant public safety risk. Providing the individual with a general overview of firearm safety without addressing the specific transfer requirements for a restricted firearm is insufficient and potentially misleading. While general safety is important, it does not absolve the individual of their responsibility to ensure the transfer itself is legal and compliant with all regulations pertaining to restricted firearms. This approach fails to address the core legal obligation of the transfer, suggesting the individual figure it out themselves or seek advice from unofficial sources is professionally negligent. It abdicates responsibility for ensuring legal compliance and could lead the individual to make critical errors that result in illegal possession or transfer, with serious legal repercussions. Professionals have a duty to guide individuals towards lawful processes. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must operate with a strict adherence to the law and a commitment to public safety. When faced with a situation involving a restricted firearm transfer, the decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the type of firearm and its classification restricted. 2. Recalling the specific legal requirements for transferring that class of firearm under Canadian law. 3. Recognizing any deviations from these requirements. 4. Taking immediate action to prevent an illegal act by guiding the individual to the correct, lawful procedure. This systematic approach ensures that all actions are legally sound and contribute to responsible firearm ownership and public safety. Question 9. The control framework reveals that a licensed individual in Ontario is preparing to transport a restricted firearm from their home to a licensed shooting range. They have completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, and understand the general principles of safe firearm handling. Considering the legal and safety requirements for transporting restricted firearms in Canada, which of the following actions best demonstrates compliance? Option A. The firearm is unloaded but placed in its original factory box with ammunition stored in the glove compartment. Option B. The firearm is loaded but in a locked case in the trunk with ammunition also in the trunk in a separate container. Option C. The firearm is unloaded, the action is open, and it is secured in a locked case, which is then transported separately from any ammunition and not readily accessible to the occupants. Option D. The firearm is unloaded and placed in a soft, unlocked gun bag on the passenger seat, with ammunition in the same bag. The correct answer is C. The firearm is unloaded, the action is open, and it is secured in a locked case, which is then transported separately from any ammunition and not readily accessible to the occupants. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the safe and legal transportation of restricted firearms in Ontario. The core difficulty lies in ensuring compliance with the Firearms Act, Canada, and its associated regulations, specifically concerning the transportation of restricted firearms, while also adhering to provincial laws and the specific requirements of the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC. Misinterpreting or neglecting any of these requirements can lead to serious legal consequences, including charges related to unsafe storage and transportation of firearms and potential loss of firearm privileges. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of firearm law and demonstrate responsible ownership. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves ensuring the restricted firearm is unloaded, the action is open, and it is secured in a locked case. This case must then be transported separately from any ammunition, and the firearm should not be readily accessible to the driver or passengers. This approach directly aligns with the principles taught in the CRFSC and the requirements of the Firearms Act, Canada, and its regulations regarding the safe transportation of restricted firearms. The unloaded and open action requirement prevents accidental discharge. The locked case ensures security against unauthorized access, and the separation from ammunition is a critical safety measure to prevent immediate use. Incorrect approaches analysis. Transporting the restricted firearm unloaded but in its original factory box, with ammunition stored in the glove compartment, is professionally unacceptable. While the firearm is unloaded, the factory box does not constitute a locked case, and storing ammunition in the glove compartment, readily accessible to the occupants, violates the principle of separating ammunition from the firearm during transport and fails to adequately secure the firearm. Carrying the restricted firearm loaded but in a locked case in the trunk of the vehicle, with ammunition also in the trunk but in a separate container, is professionally unacceptable. The primary failure here is transporting a loaded restricted firearm, which is illegal and extremely dangerous. The Firearms Act, Canada, explicitly requires restricted firearms to be unloaded for transportation. Placing the restricted firearm unloaded in a soft, unlocked gun bag on the passenger seat with ammunition in the same bag is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails on multiple critical safety and legal fronts. The soft, unlocked bag offers no security against theft or unauthorized access, and placing it on the passenger seat makes it readily accessible. Furthermore, Storing the unloaded firearm and ammunition together in the same bag directly contravenes the requirement for separation of ammunition during transport. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with firearm transportation must adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific classification of the firearm: restricted, non-restricted, prohibited, as this dictates the applicable regulations. Second, consult the Firearms Act Canada and its associated regulations for transportation requirements, paying close attention to conditions for unloading, securing, and ammunition storage. Third, recall and apply the safety principles learned in the CRFSC, which are designed to reinforce these legal requirements. Finally, always err on the side of caution, prioritizing safety and strict adherence to the law over convenience. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates a firearm owner in Ontario is preparing to transport a non-restricted rifle. The rifle itself weighs 3.5 kg. They have 5 boxes of ammunition, with each box containing 20 rounds. Each individual round of ammunition weighs approximately 0.25 kg. To ensure proper and safe transport, what is the total combined weight of the rifle and all its ammunition? Option A, 3.5 kg, option B, 6.0 kg, option C, 5.25 kg, option D, 2.5 kg. The correct answer is B, 6.0 kg. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate the total weight of a firearm and its ammunition, considering the specific limitations imposed by Canadian regulations for transportation. Miscalculation could lead to non-compliance with the Firearms Act and potentially unsafe storage or transport practices, which are central to the CRFSC mandate of promoting public safety and responsible firearm ownership in Ontario. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves accurately calculating the weight of the firearm and then adding the weight of the ammunition. The Canadian Firearms Program regulations, specifically concerning the safe storage and transportation of non-restricted firearms, implicitly require an understanding of the total weight for secure containment. The firearm weighs 3.5 kg. The ammunition consists of 5 boxes, each containing 20 rounds, and each round weighs approximately 0.025 kg. Therefore, the total weight of the ammunition is /5 text boxes times 20 text rounds box times 0.025 text kg round equals 2.5 text kg. The total combined weight is /3.5 text kg plus 2.5 text kg equals 6.0 text kg. This calculation directly addresses the need to understand the overall mass for proper handling and storage, aligning with the principles of safe firearm management taught in the CRFSC. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to only consider the weight of the firearm and ignore the ammunition. This fails to account for the total mass that needs to be secured during transport, potentially leading to an improperly secured package if weight limits for carrying cases or storage containers are a consideration, or simply an incomplete understanding of the load. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate the weight of the ammunition, but not the firearm. This also results in an incomplete understanding of the total weight, which is crucial for safe handling and transport. A third incorrect approach would be to incorrectly calculate the ammunition weight, for example, by multiplying the number of boxes by the number of rounds per box, and then by a single round's weight, without ensuring the units are consistent or the calculation is performed correctly. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of basic arithmetic and its application to firearm safety requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals must always prioritize accuracy in calculations related to firearm safety and transportation. This involves a systematic approach. Identify all components contributing to the total weight, understand the units of measurement, and perform the calculations meticulously. When in doubt, recalculating or seeking clarification is essential. The CRFSC emphasizes that responsible firearm ownership includes a thorough understanding of all aspects of handling, storage, and transportation, which inherently requires accurate quantitative assessments. Question 11. The assessment process reveals that a client in Ontario wishes to transfer a restricted firearm they legally own to a friend who is also a resident of Ontario. The client states that their friend is a responsible person and is in the process of obtaining their possession and acquisition license PAL, but they do not have it in their possession at this moment. The client is eager to complete the transfer quickly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms instructor to advise the client on regarding this transfer? Option A. Advise the client that the transfer cannot proceed without the recipient possessing a valid PAL, and that the transfer must be registered with the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program. Option B. Advise the client that they can loan the firearm to their friend temporarily until the friend obtains their PAL, as long as the friend promises to be careful. Option C. Advise the client to proceed with the transfer, as the friend is a responsible person and is in the process of obtaining a PAL, and the instructor can register it later. Option D. Advise the client to trust their friend's word and proceed with the transfer, as the instructor knows the client to be trustworthy. The correct answer is A. Advise the client that the transfer cannot proceed without the recipient possessing a valid PAL, and that the transfer must be registered with the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a client's stated desire and the legal requirements for firearm possession and transfer in Ontario, Canada. A firearms instructor must balance client satisfaction with their absolute obligation to uphold the law and ensure public safety. Misinterpreting or overlooking legal requirements can lead to serious consequences, including illegal firearm transfers and potential harm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach is to clearly explain to the client that the transfer of the restricted firearm cannot proceed without proof of a valid possession and acquisition license PAL for the intended recipient, and that the transfer must be registered with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police (RCMP) Canadian Firearms Program. This aligns directly with the requirements of the Firearms Act, Canada, and the Criminal Code of Canada, which mandate that restricted firearms can only be transferred to individuals who hold a valid PAL, and that such transfers must be recorded. Adhering to these regulations ensures legal compliance and contributes to public safety by tracking firearm ownership. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the transfer without verifying the recipient's PAL and registering the transfer is a direct violation of the Firearms Act, Canada, and the Criminal Code of Canada. This failure to comply with legal requirements constitutes an illegal transfer of a restricted firearm, which carries severe penalties for both the transferor and the transferee. It also bypasses the crucial safety checks and record-keeping mechanisms designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. Suggesting the client borrow the firearm temporarily without a formal transfer, even with the intention of returning it, is also problematic. While not a permanent transfer, it still involves the possession of a restricted firearm by an individual who may not have the legal authority to possess it in that manner, depending on the specific circumstances and duration. This could still contravene provisions related to the lawful possession and use of firearms, and it circumvents the established legal transfer and registration process. Accepting the client's assurance that the recipient is responsible and will obtain a PAL soon, without concrete proof, is a failure to exercise due diligence. The law requires verifiable documentation, not personal assurances. Relying on such assurances bypasses the legal safeguards and places the instructor in a position of facilitating a potentially illegal transaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding and applying all relevant federal and provincial firearms legislation. 2. Verifying all required documentation and licenses before proceeding with any firearm-related transaction or activity. 3. Clearly communicating legal requirements to clients and explaining the rationale behind them. 4. Refusing to engage in any activity that could be construed as illegal or unsafe, even if it means disappointing a client. 5. Seeking clarification from regulatory authorities if unsure about specific legal interpretations or procedures. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that informal instruction might seem quicker, but when a colleague in Ontario asks for advice on how to get their first restricted firearm, and you are a certified instructor, what is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action to recommend? Option A. Suggest they practice with your firearms and you can teach them the basics before they attempt the test. Option B. Advise them to enroll in an accredited Canadian restricted firearm safety course, CRFSC, and then pass the required examination. Option C. Tell them to study online resources and then take the test, as formal courses can be expensive. Option D. Recommend they focus on the practical handling and storage, as the written test is generally easy to pass without formal study. Correct answer is B. Advise them to enroll in an accredited Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, and then pass the required examination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the desire to share knowledge and experience with the absolute necessity of adhering to strict legal requirements for firearms safety instruction in Ontario. The challenge lies in recognizing that informal sharing, while well-intentioned, can inadvertently bypass crucial regulatory safeguards designed to ensure public safety and responsible firearm ownership. Careful judgment is required to discern between helpful mentorship and actions that could lead to unqualified individuals handling firearms. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves guiding the individual through the formal, legally mandated channels for obtaining firearms safety certification in Ontario. This means advising them to enroll in an accredited Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, and subsequently pass the required examination. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the requirements of the Firearms Act Canada and the regulations governing firearms safety testing in Ontario. The CRFSC curriculum is specifically designed to impart the necessary knowledge and practical skills for safe firearm handling, storage, and transportation, as mandated by law. Ethically, this upholds the principle of public safety by ensuring that all firearm owners meet a minimum standard of competence. Incorrect approach is analysis, advising the individual to simply practice with your firearms and then take the test without formal instruction fails to meet the regulatory requirement for accredited training. The law in Ontario, as derived from federal legislation, mandates that individuals demonstrate proficiency through a recognized course and examination, not through informal practice. This approach is ethically problematic as it bypasses the structured learning designed to prevent accidents and misuse. Suggesting that you can teach them the basics and they can then figure out the rest is also a regulatory and ethical failure. This informal approach does not guarantee that all critical safety aspects, including legal responsibilities, are covered. It also does not provide the necessary documentation of formal training required for licensing. This could lead to an individual being unqualified to possess a firearm legally, recommending that they only focus on the practical aspects of handling and storage, and that the written test is easy to pass without dedicated study, is a dangerous oversimplification. The CRFSC examination assesses both theoretical knowledge and practical application, including legal responsibilities and safe handling procedures. Neglecting the theoretical component, which is a core part of the accredited course, leaves the individual with incomplete knowledge and a higher risk of non-compliance or accidents. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms safety should always prioritize adherence to legal requirements and ethical responsibilities. When approached for guidance on firearm acquisition or handling, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the legal framework. Understand the specific laws and regulations governing firearm ownership and training in the relevant jurisdiction, Ontario in this case. 2. Prioritizing safety. Recognize that the primary goal of firearms safety training is to prevent harm to oneself and others. 3. Directing to accredited resources. Always guide individuals towards officially recognized courses and certification processes. 4. Avoiding informal shortcuts. Refrain from offering or endorsing any advice or practice that bypasses legal requirements, even if it seems convenient or well-intentioned. 5. Educating on the full process. Ensure the individual understands the entire legal pathway, including training, testing, licensing, and registration. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that an individual in Ontario, Canada, has recently acquired a restricted firearm and is seeking to use it for personal protection. However, they have not yet completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, or obtained a possession and acquisition license, PAL. They are aware that a friend, who is a licensed firearm owner, has a suitable restricted firearm that they are willing to lend. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the individual to take to legally acquire and possess a restricted firearm for personal protection in Ontario? Option A. Purchase the restricted firearm directly from their licensed friend, as the friend is a legal owner and can vouch for the individual. Option B. Borrow the restricted firearm from their licensed friend and store it at their own residence until they have the opportunity to complete the CRFSC and obtain a PAL. Option C. Inform their licensed friend that they need immediate personal protection and request that the friend keep the restricted firearm at the individual's residence for safekeeping. Option D. Complete the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, pass the examination, and then apply for a Possession and Acquisition License, PAL, with the appropriate authorization for restricted firearms before attempting to acquire any restricted firearm. The correct answer is D. Complete the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, pass the examination, and then apply for a Possession and Acquisition License, PAL, with the appropriate authorization for restricted firearms before attempting to acquire any restricted firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the individual to balance the immediate need for a firearm for protection against the strict legal requirements for its acquisition and possession in Ontario, Canada. Misinterpreting or disregarding these requirements can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the permanent loss of firearm privileges. The individual's stated urgency, while understandable, cannot override the established legal framework designed for public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves understanding and adhering to the legal process for acquiring a restricted firearm in Ontario. This means completing the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, passing the associated examination, and then applying for a Possession and Acquisition License, PAL, with the appropriate authorization for restricted firearms. Only after successfully obtaining this license can the individual legally purchase and possess a restricted firearm. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Firearms Act Canada and the Criminal Code of Canada, which mandate specific training and licensing for the acquisition and possession of restricted firearms. It prioritizes public safety and responsible gun ownership by ensuring individuals are knowledgeable about safe handling, storage, and legal requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to borrow a restricted firearm from a friend without first possessing a valid PAL. This is a direct contravention of the Firearms Act Canada and the Criminal Code of Canada. The Act clearly states that a person must be licensed to possess a firearm, and borrowing without a license is equivalent to unauthorized possession. This failure to follow legal acquisition procedures poses a significant safety risk and undermines the licensing system. Another incorrect approach is to purchase a restricted firearm from an unlicensed individual or through an informal transaction. This bypasses the legal transfer requirements stipulated by Canadian law, which include background checks and verification of the buyer's PAL. Such transactions are illegal and can result in severe penalties for both the buyer and the seller. This approach disregards the regulatory framework designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the friend has a license, the individual can simply store the firearm at their own residence for safekeeping. Storage regulations in Canada are very specific and tied to the license holder. An unlicensed individual cannot legally store a firearm, even if it belongs to a licensed friend. This failure to comply with storage and possession laws creates a dangerous situation and legal liability for all parties involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field involving regulated items must prioritize adherence to the governing laws and regulations. When faced with a situation where personal needs or desires conflict with legal requirements, the professional decision-making process dictates that the legal framework must be followed. This involves understanding the specific legislation, in this case, the Firearms Act and Criminal Code of Canada as they apply in Ontario, identifying the necessary steps for compliance, CRFSC, PAL application, and executing those steps diligently. If unsure about any aspect of the process, seeking clarification from official sources, such as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police RCMP, Canadian Firearms Program, or a licensed firearms dealer, is paramount. The principle of ignorance of the law is no excuse is critical, and proactive compliance is always the correct course of action. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that during a routine inspection at a licensed shooting range in Ontario, You observe a firearm owner preparing to transport their restricted firearm. You notice that the firearm is not in a locked container, and the ammunition is stored separately but not in a locked container either. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure compliance with Canadian firearm safety regulations? Option A. Proceed directly to filing a formal report with the local police department regarding the observed storage violation. Option B. Politely overlook the situation, assuming the owner is aware of the regulations and will correct it later. Option C. Calmly inform the firearm owner about the specific storage and transportation requirements for restricted firearms under the Canadian Firearms Act and its associated regulations in Ontario, and guide them on how to properly secure their firearm and ammunition before transport. Option D. Immediately confiscate the firearm and ammunition, and inform the owner that they are in violation of storage regulations. Correct answer is C. Calmly inform the firearm owner about the specific storage and transportation requirements for restricted firearms under the Canadian Firearms Act and its associated regulations in Ontario, and guide them on how to properly secure their firearm and ammunition before transport. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires immediate and decisive action based on a potential safety violation, balancing the need to prevent harm with the rights of the firearm owner. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the situation and applying the correct procedures under the Canadian Firearms Act and its associated regulations, specifically concerning the safe storage and transportation of restricted firearms in Ontario. Misjudgment could lead to a safety incident or an unwarranted infringement on an individual's rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately and calmly informing the individual about the observed violation and the specific storage requirements under Ontario law. This approach prioritizes safety by addressing the immediate risk. It is correct because it directly confronts the observed noncompliance with the Canadian Firearms Act, which mandates secure storage to prevent unauthorized access. By educating the individual and offering guidance on rectifying the situation, it promotes compliance and reinforces safe practices, aligning with the core objectives of the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course. This proactive communication is essential for preventing potential misuse or theft of the firearm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately confiscate the firearm without further communication or assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the due process and educational components of firearms safety. The Canadian Firearms Act emphasizes education and compliance, and confiscation should be a last resort after attempts to rectify the situation have failed, or if there is an immediate and severe threat. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the observation, assuming it is not a significant issue. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it neglects a potential safety hazard and fails to uphold the responsibility to ensure compliance with firearms laws in Ontario. Ignoring such a violation could have severe consequences if the firearm were to be misused. A third incorrect approach is to report the individual to the authorities without first attempting to speak with them. While reporting is an option, it is not the most professional initial step in this scenario. The Canadian approach to firearms safety often involves an educational component, and a direct conversation can often resolve the issue without escalating it unnecessarily, provided there is no immediate danger. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, education, and compliance. This involves 1. Observation and assessment. Carefully observe the situation to identify potential violations. 2. Direct communication. Engage with the individual in a calm and professional manner to explain the observed issue and relevant regulations. 3. Education and guidance. Provide clear information on correct procedures and offer assistance in rectifying the situation. 4. Escalation if necessary. If the individual is uncooperative or the risk remains high, then follow established protocols for reporting to the appropriate authorities. This structured approach ensures that safety is paramount while respecting individual rights and promoting responsible firearm ownership. Question 15. System analysis indicates a licensed individual in Ontario, Canada, who possesses a restricted firearm, is preparing to store it for an extended period. The individual lives in a household with a minor who has not completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for storing this restricted firearm to ensure maximum safety and prevent unauthorized access? Option A. Store the restricted firearm unloaded, with the action open or removed, and secured with a trigger lock, cable lock, or similar device. Then place it in a locked container, safe, or vault that is separate from any ammunition. Option B. Store the restricted firearm loaded with a cable lock in a locked gun safe. Option C. Store the restricted firearm unloaded and unlocked in a locked gun safe, while the ammunition is stored in a separate, unlocked drawer. Option D. Store the restricted firearm unloaded with a trigger lock, but leave it in the same unlocked cabinet as the ammunition. The correct answer is A. Store the restricted firearm unloaded, with the action open or removed, and secured with a trigger lock, cable lock, or similar device. Then place it in a locked container, safe, or vault that is separate from any ammunition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the safe storage of restricted firearms in Ontario, Canada, particularly when a minor is present in the home. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the legal requirements for firearm storage with the practical realities of family life and the need to prevent unauthorized access, especially by individuals who have not completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC. The presence of a minor introduces an elevated duty of care and requires meticulous adherence to provincial and federal regulations to ensure public safety and prevent potential accidents or misuse. Careful judgment is required to select the storage method that unequivocally meets all legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves storing the restricted firearm unloaded, with the action open or removed, and locked with a trigger lock, cable lock, or similar device. This storage method must then be placed in a locked container, safe, or vault that is separate from any ammunition. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the requirements outlined in the Criminal Code of Canada and the Ontario regulations pertaining to firearm storage. Specifically, it ensures the firearm is rendered inoperable unloaded, action open/removed, locked, and inaccessible in a locked container separate from ammunition, thereby minimizing the risk of unauthorized access or accidental discharge, which is paramount when a minor resides in the household. This comprehensive approach leaves no ambiguity regarding compliance with safety standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. Storing the restricted firearm unloaded with a trigger lock, but leaving it in the same unlocked cabinet as the ammunition is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the requirement for ammunition to be stored separately from the firearm, increasing the risk of immediate access and potential misuse. Storing the restricted firearm loaded with a cable lock in a locked gun safe is also professionally unacceptable. The Criminal Code of Canada explicitly prohibits storing firearms loaded, regardless of whether a locking device is used or if the safe is locked. This method directly contravenes the fundamental principle of firearm safety that firearms must be unloaded when stored. Storing the restricted firearm unloaded and unlocked in a locked gun safe while the ammunition is stored in a separate, unlocked drawer is professionally unacceptable. While the firearm is unloaded and in a locked safe, the ammunition is not secured in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, and the firearm itself, though in a safe, is not secured with a trigger lock or similar device, as per best practices for restricted firearms. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the most stringent interpretation of all applicable laws and safety guidelines. This involves a step-by-step verification process. Is the firearm unloaded? Is the action open or removed? Is a locking device, trigger lock, cable lock, etc. applied? Is the firearm stored in a locked container, safe, or vault? Is this container separate from all ammunition? By systematically checking each of these criteria against the chosen storage method, professionals can ensure full compliance and uphold their duty of care. Question 16. Implementation of responsible firearm ownership in Ontario requires careful consideration when a friend expresses interest in borrowing a restricted rifle for an upcoming hunting trip, stating they are in the process of obtaining their possession and acquisition license PAL, but do not yet have it. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Canadian firearms laws? Option A. Lend the rifle to the friend for the hunting trip, with the understanding that they will complete the PAL application process shortly thereafter. Option B. Advise the friend that they can use the rifle under supervision during the hunting trip, as long as the firearm remains in your possession. Option C. Agree to hold the rifle for the friend until their PAL is issued, allowing them to handle it at your residence before they officially receive it. Option D. Verify the friend's current PAL status, and if valid, proceed with the formal registration of the firearm transfer according to Canadian Firearms Program requirements. The correct answer is D. Verify the friend's current PAL status, and if valid, proceed with the formal registration of the firearm transfer according to Canadian Firearms Program requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the individual to balance the immediate desire to assist a friend with the absolute legal and ethical obligations surrounding the transfer of firearms. Misjudging this situation could lead to serious legal repercussions, including criminal charges and a loss of firearm privileges. The core challenge lies in understanding that, while personal relationships are important, they do not supersede the strict regulatory framework governing firearms in Canada. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves strictly adhering to the legal requirements for transferring a firearm in Ontario. This means ensuring the recipient possesses the appropriate license, possession, and acquisition license (PAL), and that the transfer is registered with the Canadian Firearms Program. The individual must verify the recipient's PAL status and complete the necessary paperwork for registration. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Criminal Code of Canada and the Firearms Act, which mandate licensing and registration for all firearm transfers to prevent unauthorized possession and ensure accountability. It upholds public safety and demonstrates responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply handing the rifle over to the friend with the understanding that they will get their PAL later. This is a direct violation of the law. The Criminal Code of Canada prohibits the possession of a firearm without a valid license. This action creates an illegal possession situation for the friend and makes the transferor complicit in an illegal act. Another incorrect approach is to suggest the friend borrow the rifle for a hunting trip without formally transferring it. This circumvents the legal transfer process and still results in an unlicensed individual possessing a firearm. The law does not make exceptions for temporary use or borrowing without proper licensing and registration. A third incorrect approach is to offer to hold onto the rifle for the friend until they obtain their PAL, implying a temporary transfer of possession. While seemingly helpful, this still constitutes an unauthorized transfer of possession if the friend exercises any control or access to the firearm. The legal definition of possession is broad and includes having control over a firearm, even if it's not physically in their hands at all times. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearms handling must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. When faced with a request involving a firearm transfer, the first step is to confirm the legal requirements for such a transfer in Ontario. This involves understanding licensing, registration, and any applicable waiting periods or background checks. If the proposed transfer does not meet these legal criteria, the professional must politely but firmly decline the request and explain the legal obligations. Building trust with others is important, but it must be done within the bounds of the law. Question 17. To address the challenge of a client in Ontario who wishes to purchase a restricted firearm immediately but has not yet completed the Canadian Restricted Firearms Firearm Safety Course, CRFSC, or obtained a possession and acquisition license, PAL, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for a licensed firearms retailer? Option A. Accept the client's assurance that they will obtain the necessary license shortly and proceed with the sale, advising them to complete the process as soon as possible. Option B. Suggest that the client can temporarily possess the firearm under the direct supervision of a licensed individual while they complete their licensing process. Option C. Inform the client that they must first successfully complete the CRFSC and obtain a valid PAL with the appropriate authorization before any transaction for a restricted firearm can proceed, and explain the legal requirements for acquisition. Option D. Recommend that the client purchase a non-restricted firearm instead, as this may have fewer immediate licensing hurdles. The correct answer is C. Inform the client that they must first successfully complete the CRFSC and obtain a valid PAL with the appropriate authorization before any transaction for a restricted firearm can proceed, and explain the legal requirements for acquisition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a direct conflict between a client's stated desire and the legal requirements for firearm possession in Ontario, Canada. The challenge lies in balancing client service with the absolute necessity of adhering to the Firearms Act, Canada, and its associated regulations, specifically concerning the lawful acquisition and possession of restricted firearms. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations can lead to severe legal consequences for both the client and the firearms business. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled as stated, because it directly contravenes Canadian federal law regarding the acquisition of restricted firearms. Specifically, the Firearms Act, Canada, mandates that individuals must possess a valid possession and acquisition license, PAL, with the appropriate authorization to acquire restricted firearms. The business must explain that the client must first successfully complete the Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course, CRFSC, and obtain a valid PAL before any transaction for a restricted firearm can proceed. This approach upholds the law, protects the business from liability, and educates the client on the proper legal framework for firearm ownership in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale by accepting the client's assurance that they will obtain the necessary license later. This is a direct violation of the Firearms Act, Canada, which prohibits the transfer of restricted firearms to individuals without a valid PAL. This action exposes the business to significant legal penalties, including fines and potential revocation of its business license. It also places the client in an illegal possession situation. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the client can temporarily possess the firearm under the supervision of a licensed individual without completing the required licensing process. While supervised use might be permissible in certain limited contexts, it does not negate the fundamental requirement for the individual to hold a valid PAL to acquire and possess a restricted firearm. This approach misrepresents the law and creates a false sense of legality for the client. A further incorrect approach is to advise the client to purchase a non-restricted firearm instead, implying this bypasses the licensing requirements for restricted firearms. While non-restricted firearms have different acquisition rules, this suggestion is still problematic if the client's intent is to acquire a restricted firearm, and the business is facilitating a transaction without ensuring the client meets all legal prerequisites for their desired firearm type. The core issue remains the client's lack of a valid PAL for restricted firearms. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the firearms industry must operate with a strict adherence to the Firearms Act, Canada, and provincial regulations. The decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance above all else. When faced with a client request that appears to conflict with the law, the professional's duty is to 1. Identify the specific legal requirements applicable to the request. 2. Clearly communicate these legal requirements to the client. 3. Refuse any action that would violate the law, even if it means losing a sale. 4. Provide accurate guidance on how the client can legally achieve their objective. Question 18. The review process indicates that a customer in Ontario wishes to purchase a restricted firearm for recreational target shooting. They express frustration, stating they just want to shoot at the range, and question why they need a license for this specific purpose. As a firearms retailer, how should you proceed? Option A. Proceed with the sale, accepting the customer's assurance that the firearm will only be used for target practice, as this intent mitigates the need for a license. Option B. Politely explain that a valid possession and acquisition license, PAL, is a mandatory legal requirement in Ontario for the acquisition of any restricted firearm, regardless of intended use, and therefore the sale cannot proceed without it. Option C. Inform the customer that while a license is generally required, there might be exceptions for recreational use, and advise them to look into provincial regulations themselves. Option D. Offer to hold the firearm for the customer and suggest they can complete the license application process after the purchase. The correct answer is B. Politely explain that a valid possession and acquisition license, PAL, is a mandatory legal requirement in Ontario for the acquisition of any restricted firearm, regardless of intended use, and therefore the sale cannot proceed without it. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a customer's stated intent and the legal requirements for firearm acquisition in Ontario. The challenge lies in balancing customer service with the absolute necessity of adhering to the Firearms Act Canada and its associated regulations, specifically regarding the verification of a valid possession and acquisition license. PAL. Failure to properly verify the PAL can lead to serious legal repercussions for both the seller and the buyer, and compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to politely but firmly inform the customer that a valid PAL is a mandatory legal requirement for the purchase of any restricted firearm in Ontario, regardless of their stated intent to use it for target practice. This approach directly upholds the legal framework governing firearm sales in Canada. The Firearms Act Canada and the Criminal Code of Canada mandate that individuals must possess a valid PAL to acquire restricted firearms. Refusing the sale and explaining the legal obligation demonstrates adherence to these laws, prioritizes public safety, and avoids facilitating an illegal transaction. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale, assuming the customer's word is sufficient and that their stated intent for target practice negates the need for a PAL. This is a direct violation of the Firearms Act, Canada, which makes no exceptions for intended use when acquiring restricted firearms. It also bypasses the crucial screening process inherent in the PAL system, which is designed to ensure only eligible individuals possess firearms. Another incorrect approach is to suggest the customer acquire a license at a later date or to offer to hold the firearm until they have one. This is also legally untenable. The law requires the PAL to be valid at the time of acquisition. Holding a restricted firearm for a customer without a valid PAL at the point of sale is effectively facilitating an illegal transfer and is a serious regulatory breach. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the customer's request without clearly explaining the legal requirements. While not directly facilitating an illegal act, this approach fails to educate the customer on their legal obligations and could lead to misunderstandings or future attempts to circumvent the law. Professional conduct in this situation includes clear communication of legal requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the firearms industry must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance above all else. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing all relevant federal and provincial legislation pertaining to firearms. 2. Recognizing that customer intent, while important for service, cannot override legal mandates. 3. Communicating legal requirements clearly and respectfully to customers. 4. Refusing any transaction that would violate the law, even if it means losing a sale. 5. Seeking clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel if unsure about specific legal interpretations. Question 19. Examination of the data shows that a friend in Ontario, who you know to be a responsible individual, has expressed a strong interest in learning to shoot restricted firearms and has asked to borrow your restricted firearm for an upcoming supervised range day. You are aware that your friend does not currently possess a possession and acquisition license, PAL, for restricted firearms. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action? Option A. Inform your friend that you cannot allow them to borrow or possess the restricted firearm until they have successfully obtained their own valid PAL for restricted firearms, and that the firearm must be legally transferred and registered to them if they wish to acquire it. Option B. Suggest that your friend can borrow the restricted firearm for the range day, and you will handle the registration paperwork later if they decide they like shooting. Option C. Hand over the restricted firearm to your friend for the range day, trusting their good character and your supervision to ensure safety. Option D. Allow your friend to use the restricted firearm at the range under your direct supervision, as you are a licensed owner and will ensure it is handled safely. The correct answer is A. Inform your friend that you cannot allow them to borrow or possess the restricted firearm until they have successfully obtained their own valid PAL for restricted firearms, and that the firearm must be legally transferred and registered to them if they wish to acquire it. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the individual to balance the immediate desire to assist a friend with the absolute legal and ethical obligations surrounding the transfer of restricted firearms in Canada. The core of the challenge lies in understanding and adhering to the strict legal framework governing firearms ownership and transfer, which is designed to ensure public safety and prevent unauthorized access to potentially dangerous weapons. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations, even with good intentions, can have severe legal consequences and compromise safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to the legal requirements for transferring restricted firearms in Ontario. This means ensuring that the intended recipient possesses a valid possession and acquisition license (PAL) for restricted firearms, and that the transfer is registered with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police (RCMP) Canadian Firearms Program. This process confirms the recipient's legal eligibility and creates an official record of the transfer, fulfilling the requirements of the Firearms Act and its associated regulations. This approach prioritizes public safety and legal compliance, which are paramount in firearms management. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves simply handing the firearm over to the friend without verifying their PAL or completing the registration process. This directly violates the Firearms Act, which mandates specific procedures for the transfer of restricted firearms. The failure to confirm the recipient's legal authorization to possess such a firearm creates a significant safety risk and exposes both parties to legal penalties, including fines and potential imprisonment. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the friend can borrow the firearm temporarily without a formal transfer. This circumvents the legal requirements for ownership and possession. Even a temporary transfer of a restricted firearm without proper authorization and registration is illegal and carries the same penalties as an outright sale or gift. The law does not differentiate based on the duration of possession for restricted firearms. Legal authorization and registration are always required. A third incorrect approach is to suggest that the friend can use the firearm under the current owner's supervision without a formal transfer. While supervision by a licensed individual is a component of safe firearm use, it does not negate the legal requirement for the recipient to possess their own valid PAL for restricted firearms, and for the firearm to be legally transferred and registered to them if they are to have possession or control. This approach misunderstands the fundamental principles of firearms licensing and transfer in Canada. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, in this case, Ontario, Canada, governed by federal firearms legislation. 2. Recognizing that good intentions do not excuse legal infractions. 3. Consulting official resources or seeking expert advice when in doubt about legal procedures. 4. Always opting for the legally mandated process, even if it appears more cumbersome, as it is designed to prevent harm and ensure accountability. Question 20. Upon reviewing the transportation requirements for a hunting trip in Ontario, a licensed individual is preparing to transport one rifle weighing 3.5 kg and its ammunition weighing 1.2 kg, along with one shotgun weighing 3.0 kg and its ammunition weighing 0.8 kg. What is the total weight of the firearms and ammunition that must be considered for transportation purposes? Option A, 8.0 kg. Option B, 8.5 kg. Option C, 6.5 kg. Option D, 7.7 kg. The correct answer is B, 8.5 kg. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate the total weight of firearms and ammunition for transport, which is directly tied to the legal weight limits for transportation in a vehicle as stipulated by Canadian federal and provincial regulations governing the transport of firearms. Miscalculation could lead to an illegal transport situation, resulting in penalties and potential loss of licensing. Careful judgment is required to ensure all components are accounted for and the calculation is precise. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously calculating the weight of each individual firearm and then summing these weights with the total weight of the ammunition. This approach ensures all components contributing to the overall load are considered. Specifically, for the rifle, its weight is 3.5 kg. For the shotgun, its weight is 3.0 kg. The ammunition for the rifle weighs 1.2 kg and the ammunition for the shotgun weighs 0.8 kg. The total weight is therefore \3.5 \text kg plus 3.0 0 text kg plus 1, 2 text kg plus 0, 8 text kg equals 8, 5 text kg. This precise calculation directly addresses the regulatory requirement to know the total weight for safe and legal transport. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to only sum the weights of the firearms and disregard the weight of the ammunition. This fails to account for the full load being transported, which is a critical component of weight regulations. Another incorrect approach is to estimate the total weight by rounding up or down without precise calculation. This introduces a margin of error that could lead to exceeding legal limits or underestimating the load, both of which are regulatory failures. Finally, an approach that only considers the weight of the heaviest firearm and the ammunition for that firearm is also incorrect, as it does not represent the total weight of all items being transported. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach transport weight calculations by breaking down the total weight into its constituent parts, firearms and ammunition. Each component's weight should be accurately determined and then summed. This systematic approach ensures compliance with all relevant transportation regulations, such as those found in the Criminal Code of Canada and provincial vehicle weight regulations, which are paramount for safe and legal firearm ownership and transport.